The number of LGBTQ teens who have considered suicide is rising.
A national survey from the Trevor Project, a suicide prevention organization for queer youth, found nearly half of trans girls considered suicide in the last year.
We need to have more access to mental health care. That is critical. We need the government and people in positions of power to be providing affirming spaces.
It's the transgender kids that are being bullied and hurt.
And we're committed to advancing transgender equality simply everywhere.
Some on the right have truly lost their minds about trans rights.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Well, some of the medical professionals who make money by mutilating the bodies of young women are now being sued for what they've done.
A lot of people in the news coming out detransitioning. Could you speak to that phenomenon?
I've been in this work for a long time.
The concern
I've just never
is
heard a case.
My voice is really deep and raspy today, so I could probably do some like bass stuff, like.
The shirt's made out of thin material, so.
No, I know, but it looks better now. Are we good rolling again?
Yeah, we're still rolling.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
You look really bad. This shot's outstanding. Can we get someone else to sit in the chair?
I'd say it started around 11 or 12. I mean, a lot of the girls and even the women I knew, they would just constantly complain about how terrible being a girl is, like how awful periods are and how scary it is to be pregnant and give birth and things like that, and never like any of the positive things that come with any of that. I mean, the way they were framing womanhood, it made me really scared to grow from a girl into a woman, and I didn't really want to do anything with it. And as soon as I was exposed to the idea that, I mean, there was a way out for me, I started to question whether I really wanted this for myself and if I wanted to basically switch teams.
And this was in 2018. I believe this was June because this was a friend's graduation.
What do you feel when you look at that now?
I don't like to see these photos. It's more of a, I can't believe I did that. My name is Abel Garcia. I transitioned in November of 2016, and in December of 2020, I removed the implants that I had received. And I wasn't the most masculine kid growing up. Seeing other kids my age and my cousins, I didn't seem adequate enough as a boy. For some reason, my mind assumed that if I'm not adequate enough to be a man, I must be a woman. But obviously, being a little kid, I obviously didn't have the words for that. So I guess that you can say that's the earliest sign I had of gender dysphoria.
Swing low, sweet chariot. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na. Amazing grace. No, not anywhere near as low. Like, I can go into like the baritone register. But I can go high too, but just right now, it's not cooperating when I try to go high. Physically, I looked, feminine, but then I would speak and people would be like, oh my God, what's wrong with your voice? Like, why does it sound like that? I felt like my brain kind of worked differently from other girls. I remember also looking at little boys and, for instance, seeing the freedom they had to take off their shirt. And I remember being at a park as a little girl and I saw like a dad and two little boys that had their shirts off, and I asked my mom, can I do that? And she let me, like, in the car. I knew as a girl I was not socially acceptable to do that, even at that age. And like, I just remember having an aversion to the idea of growing hips and breasts. Like, I just didn't want to develop into a woman at all.
My name is Xandra. I'm 31 years old. I decided that I was going to transition when I was 18 years old, and I was 29 when I decided to detransition. I knew something was up because I came out as a lesbian when I was 12. So just really early on in middle school. But I wasn't really like familiar with the idea of gender so much until later on in high school. And it was actually a girlfriend who had a YouTube channel is where I learned about, it was just like, I'm aware vaguely that people do this in transition. I didn't realize there was a whole community surrounding it or anything. Yeah, so when I discovered it, you know, my girlfriend at the time was like, here, check these out. And I was like, you know, these things make sense. These sound like me. Like I always knew I liked girls and I always felt really different from a young age. And there's this one picture of me that I always used to show people, like, look, I even looked like a little boy. and I totally did.
Ready to go? All right. Hi, I'm Walt Heyer. I, quote, transitioned in 1983. I detransitioned in January 1990. The childhood was, you know, probably not that remarkable. My grandmother, my mom's mother, would babysit me. Now, Grandma was a bit of a character. She was as wide and round as she was tall, and she drank a little bit, maybe a little too much. And she always wore an apron, always had a cigarette stuck in her face. And she was also a seamstress. And when I was, you know, over at her house and she was taking care of me for the weekend, she was making women's clothing. That's what she did. That was her little side job. And she made them in the house. Women would come over and she'd fit them and make them, and that was her job. And so I got kind of curious about that, and I started thinking about cross-dressing probably just because of the influence, and I think curiosity. Kids are curious. And so I got curious about this, and so she decided, in her great wisdom, to make me a purple chiffon evening dress just for me. And so she had a little cushion that I stood on, and she made all the chiffon and put me in this purple dress that she made. And so it wasn't long, she had the dress made, put me on it, told me how cute I was, how wonderful I was. And at the time, it all seemed like just crazy fun. It didn't seem like anything was wrong. But I got so accustomed to like wearing the dress and hearing Grandma tell me how cute I was. There's something that kind of happens with this cross-dressing thing, and that you begin to kind of like enjoy it. And you sort of become addicted. I use the word addicted to it. My mom found the dress. I had stuffed it away in a drawer, and so Mom says, where'd you get this? And I said, well, you know, your mom made it. And so then all hell broke loose in the house, because my dad, who was an auxiliary police officer and an industrial goods salesman, a strong, manly man, went berserk. And so he was going to use a hardwood floor plank in the best way he knew how to discipline me, to try to shape me and make me manly, strong, and that's what he did. Well, he didn't understand that using a hardwood floor plank as a disciplinary tool was probably causing a little bit more harm. I don't blame him for it. He had no way to know what to do. There was no book on what to do if mother-in-law cross-dresses your kid and tells him how cute he looks. And so he was doing the best he could.
We're constantly bombarded with seemingly perfect images in our Instagram feeds, and Facebook research shows it's taking its toll on young teens.
You can go down a real ugly path with this if you believe that what you're seeing is true.
It makes me feel like bad, you know, like as if I'm not physically enough.
I started using social media at a pretty young age. I was 11 when I made my first Instagram account. I mean, not only was I exposed to like some really, I guess you would say, toxic content from other young women, like either, like I said earlier, just like complaining about how bad being a girl is, or like even like idealized, like, or like even sexualized images of themselves. I saw a lot of images of young women who were like, they were wearing a lot of makeup, some very skimpy clothing, and a lot of them had like plastic surgery, but I didn't really realize at the time that I wasn't really supposed to look like that, or that doesn't really represent what a woman really is. But I mean, I was a kid, and it was harder to process things like that. I was the only trans person, but that I knew of in real life, other than up until my sophomore year of high school. I mostly saw it online, on Instagram usually, but sometimes I would see it in like gaming communities online, and like communities around like not only video games but also like anime, cartoons, comics, kind of more nerdy communities.
I didn't really have much friends. I was a very shy kid, very quiet, timid, very reserved. Didn't have obviously the best childhood because my parents were here in the U.S. illegally. I was raised by my grandparents since my parents had to work, both of them had to work jobs. So I grew up in poverty. My father was an illegal immigrant working nonstop, eventually getting a better job, but required him to be gone 5-6 days a week. I didn't get to spend much time with him, so I didn't really build a bond with my father, someone who is the male role model in my family, who I should have learned everything from him. So I didn't really learn much how to be a man, and it obviously doesn't help the fact that being Mexican, my culture is very machismo, which means very masculine for those who don't understand Spanish.
I didn't have a lot of friends when I was little. I had trouble connecting with the other kids. I believe I might be undiagnosed autistic because I had a delay in social development. My first best friend was in first grade. We had very intense interests and obsessions. We enjoyed dressing up as different characters, and we'd even like come to school dressed as different characters, which like other people thought was weird. At 5, I asked my mom if I could change gender, but it wasn't really so much a coming out, it was just a curiosity. But then at 13, which was after I discovered transgender websites and forums, and I sort of had language to describe my experience, back then it was known as gender identity disorder, I did come out to my mom and told her I'd felt like a boy since I was 5. And then from there, she told my dad. The two of them discussed it, looked up some of the medical procedures that female to male transgender people go through, and they got really scared for me. I think they just didn't want me to go through that. They were worried about me not passing as a man. And so they basically told me, they didn't affirm my gender identity and just told me, you're a girl. And that was really painful at the time, but I'm actually grateful for it today.
I've always been regarded as a quiet child, a little emotional. And I've always just kind of like, I don't know how to describe myself at 3.
When you barked at the ballerina
I barked.
instructor.
I really like to tutu, and I like to bark at people while wearing a tutu. I was a very strange child.
That's why I married her.
In the 50s, all of a sudden, there's this Christine Jorgensen, for those people who don't know, came out. There was a soldier that they said had surgery and became a female. And so that was the first thing I'd heard about in the 50s. And I went, dang, maybe that's who I am.
Shown being honored by the Scandinavian Societies of Greater New York at their annual ball and named as Woman of the Year.
This was where that kind of identity began to form. So I decided to go to a gender therapist, and I got to tell you something. Do not ever in your life go to a gender therapist. They are constructed and designed to destroy your life. They are not going to help you. They're going to ruin you.
I didn't really tell my parents or the rest of my family about it until about a few months later, after I made this realization that I didn't really want to be a girl anymore. Their response was to start making me see a therapist to get these feelings sorted out and figure out why I was feeling this way and what we could do about it. My first therapist was pretty lousy, honestly. He didn't really do much. We were referred to a gender specialist who then diagnosed me with gender dysphoria.
When I was 17, at that point I'd been dysphoric I'd been identifying as trans for about 4 years. I'd come out to my parents a couple times, and it just became clear that this wasn't going away. So I asked them to take me to a gender therapist, and they were like, sure, great, this person's gonna help you work through your issues. But instead, he affirmed me on the very first appointment. And within 3 appointments, he suggested to my parents that I start testosterone. I told him about my eating disorder. I told him about some other mental health issues I was having, like anxiety, depression. I believe I had undiagnosed autism as well, which was misdiagnosed as borderline personality disorder. But I told him about all of that, and he just didn't really seem to care that much. I told him gender dysphoria was the root issue, and he just like took my self-diagnosis at face value. It just felt like I was being put on a path to transition rather than him actually deeply exploring my issues.
They have one mindset, hormone surgery. There's nothing else that they can even see. Their agenda is to build a population of transgender identifying people.
So I went to the local LGBT center in my area. I asked for a therapist and they gave me one of their therapists. But by the time I did this, I had actually moved out from my parents' house, so they didn't really know what was going on with me. Immediately on my first appointment, she affirmed me as a transgender woman, had my letter to transition right away. And when I asked why, she said because she did not want to gatekeep me.
You know, you're not a candidate for surgery if you've been sexually molested. It's a crime. You're not a candidate if you've been physically abused. You need to go to a trauma therapist and work through the things that caused you to not like who you are. That would be the right therapist, but they don't do that. You know, today they call that gatekeeping. You're just supposed to agree with whatever a kid, 2 years old, 5 years old, 10, 15, it doesn't matter.
I don't remember it being very thorough. There should have been a lot more exploration as to why I felt this way and why I wanted to stop being a girl, but there just wasn't any.
He suggested the testosterone. My parents didn't approve. They thought it was shocking how quickly he was moving. So we didn't actually proceed with the medical part, but that definitely planted the seed. And sometime around that time, maybe shortly after, is when this narrative of if kids don't transition, they'll commit suicide, that started to gain traction. For the next 6 years, I really believed that if I didn't transition, I couldn't be happy. And that affected me until I finally went full steam ahead with medical transition at age 28.
For young people who come out as transgender, the depression and suicide rates are alarmingly high.
The death of an Ohio teenager has sparked national outrage, with reports the teen committed suicide after being shunned for being transgender.
Everything I learned about transgenderism and transitioning basically came from this little online YouTube community, because this was all before TikTok was the biggest thing. And they would be like, first of all, this is how you know you're trans, this is how you get testosterone, this is who you can get it from. There was a lot of information on ways to get it. I didn't see a therapist. Doctor did prescribe it without a therapist.
Of the people that I've worked with, I have found almost none of them have gender dysphoria. They all have some comorbid disorder or some childhood developmental issue or something that happened to them. So when people write me and I get involved in them, I always ask them, tell me what happened to you that caused you to not like who you are.
I mean, when I was 4 years old, I was sexually assaulted. So there's,
Okay, let's talk about
yeah. A teenage relative came to stay with us the summer before I started kindergarten. And there was just one day that my little sister was a baby, so there was baby monitors in the house, and my mom heard something suspicious. And she walked downstairs to try and find me, opened the door, and caught the kid red-handed.
Boys who've been sexually molested as a young person want to remove their genitalia. We've heard those stories. When you dig down in some of the cases, you'll find out they want to remove their genitalia, not because they want to be a girl, but that's what gets misunderstood. They don't really want to be a girl. They want to remove their genitalia so they'll never be sexually abused again.
So you're 19, and from then your dad wants to intervene on this or talk to you?
So a few months after going to therapy, he was informed by my mother. He assumed the best way to fix it would be to take me to Mexico and have sexual relationship with a prostitute. He said, I have a dentist appointment in Mexico. It's obviously cheaper there. And he said he was going to be on some type of drug that would probably make him unable to drive. So he said he needed a backup driver just in case. So we get to Mexico, he goes to the dentist. After everything, he talks to the lady next door, which was a florist, if I remember correctly. And him, his dentist, and my father are all talking about lying to me, saying, "Oh, we're gonna go eat. Let's figure out some restaurants." I walk past this restaurant, obviously later realizing it was a brothel. I tried to look inside. It's like, it doesn't seem like a restaurant. He's like, no, it's a restaurant. It's like, okay. I do see a little chair. It's like, I sit down and I mind my own stuff on my phone. Next thing I know, my father says, Abel, and he tells me to get up and then look up and I see a row of women in front of me. And he tells me pick one. I'm just like trying to comprehend what's going on and then realize, oh, I'm not in a good situation. I just randomly pick one of those women, all of them leave, and I overheard my father tell me, prostitute in Spanish, I'll translate in a second. Cuídalo bien es su primera vez, which translates to take good care of him, it's his first time. I gotta be honest, I don't recall much after that because the prostitute walks in. No, I wasn't drugged, for those wondering. My own memory chooses not to remember, but overall what I do recall after that incident, obviously I did go with her to that room. Obviously I wasn't able to perform and we ran out of time. And I asked her, can you lie for me? Tell my father it went well, it went great, whatever, I don't really care. I obviously lied to my father. Oh, I had a great time. We should definitely come back. But obviously inside I was very angry, very upset. But that was actually what was, I guess you can call it, the straw that broke the camel's back, my trigger, however you want to word it. But that was what made me jump off the ledge head first into shark-infested water with the transitioning. Obviously I told the therapist. She was upset with my father. And I eventually accepted the hormones a few months later, and that was what caused me to transition.
This is the way they protect themselves. If my genitalia is gone, nobody will touch me. Same way with many females. They will, grow the beard, they'll look this way so that they will repulse somebody from sexually molesting them. They feel safe with another woman. They don't feel safe with men because men have harmed them.
A few months after I started testosterone, I actually was groped by a boy who had been bullying me for that school year. And, at the time I was only about a B cup and I would wear baggy shirts. I didn't think that my chest was very visible, but I realized that there was a little more shape there than I realized, and I was afraid to have that part of me showing. I didn't want it to be visible. I thought it was just going to bring me more unnecessary attention like that. And so shortly after that incident, I actually bought my first few binders. I started using them to flatten the appearance of my chest so that people would think that I was a boy, and I hoped that it would stop the assault from ever happening again.
It was my dad's adopted brother, Uncle Fred, who, when I was about 8 or 9, decided that he sexually molested me, began doing this because he thought it was appropriate. He was a little bit like my grandmother. He was a young teenage guy, but when they had parties at houses, he would dip into the punch that had a little extra juice in it, maybe a little Jack Daniels, maybe a little who knows what, and he would get a little intoxicated, and then it started. Sometimes at these parties in the backyard or somewhere, he would start teasing me, and then this occurred many, many times over a period of years, probably till I was 9 years old. I did tell my parents at one point what Fred was doing, and they said Fred would never do that. So I realized when they wouldn't listen to me that I couldn't trust anybody with even truthful information, and that he was going to deny it. I had no way to prove it. And so I was kind of stuck in this zone of being a liar, lying about Fred. So my parents really didn't trust me much after that. They just thought I was making everything up. And then I think when I was sexually molested by my uncle, I think that was another fraction point. And being physically abused with a hardwood floor plank is another. These are what I call turning points. That the children, when they have these events in their life, they don't know what to do with them.
Once you start one thing, it's like never enough, and you're always looking for the next thing. Like you start hormones, and that helps you for a while, but then you want the top surgery, and then people who've had top surgery will say, well, I got that done, but now I really want the bottom surgery. So it's always one thing after another.
Every child, they get hooked, and believe me, anabolic steroids are addictive, and you get kids hooked on this stuff, and they can make $200,000 or $300,000 in a lifetime.
As soon as I went to my primary care physician and told him I wanted to transition, had the letter from my therapist to transition. So he didn't tell me any side effects. Just told me what I wanted to hear, which was I would eventually become the woman that I wanted to be. Obviously, the hormones were. He didn't say they were magical, but the way obviously these people word everything, the way they say it, it's if you don't understand anything, if you're a gullible child or young adult, it sounds like a magic pill.
Because I remember you did a shot like in front of me, and I was like, I don't like needles, so. You know.
She faints watching me get shots.
Yeah, so I like turned around and she's like, I got my shot, and you know.
I was on blockers for about a month or so before I started on testosterone. It was pretty quick. That's kind of a pattern in my experience actually. It's the process between like getting referrals and actually getting the treatments. It was pretty quick.
I wish the doctor had stopped me. I wish they had required therapy because I needed a lot of it. There was a lot of things that I didn't address for many, many years. Yeah, I wish the doctor would have said, you probably should see a therapist before I put you down this path.
Yeah, and it too, I remember you telling me like that was a requirement of getting testosterone is you had to see a therapist. And none of that actually happened with her. Like she told me, you remember you were telling me about that, like they want you to like prove that you have been living like this, that you've sought therapy over it and stuff like that before they give you the hormones, but they didn't really do that.
No, they didn't do it at all.
Yeah.
He had a transgender, male to female, on site who wasn't even a medical professional. He was just an activist and working with the clinic. And he said, do you want to talk to someone who's already been on this path? And I said, sure. Well, if someone who's been on it, they should probably know any side effects or anything. And I spoke to them. This man had me stand up and do a little twirl for him. And he said, just by doing that, he said, just by looking at you, I can tell you were supposed to be born a woman.
Are we all rolling on everything? We're all on this too? Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about what your job description is and what a transgender medical center does? What do you provide for people?
I personally am trained as an endocrinologist, and my history in gender-affirming medicine is providing hormones to transgender people who are looking for hormones. We try to, as a group, provide all care for transgender people, in addition to being thoughtful, considering that this is a space where there is much we don't know about what works, what doesn't work, and sharing that with others and modeling how that care should look for others. Is you need to have a certain level of maturity in order to be able to tell us your gender identity and what you want to do about it. And so we draw a line in our guidelines at the age of 18, where we say, look, if you're over 18, unless we find a reason why we want to spend more time thinking about it with you, we take you at your word. If you come and you tell us that you are transgender and there's nothing else going on, most people who come and tell us that they understand gender identity and they are transgender and they are looking for treatment, that is really true, and we go with that.
Parents, their kids, and their doctors make decisions together, and no medical interventions with permanent consequences happen until a person is old enough to give informed consent.
What about gender reassignment surgery, which is another form of gender-affirming care? That's not recommended for people under the age of 18. Why not?
Well, that's actually something that's a little bit of a mischaracterization. There are real processes that are scientifically informed that have developed the guidelines that physicians use every day to provide gender-affirming care to young people, and that those processes are trustworthy and sound.
The harm is how you see yourself. You see your body's been radically changed, and it's not repairable. It'll never function. The parts that they tore up, you can never make function again.
Obviously, I have genital atrophy. For those who don't know what that means, it just means all my genitals are much smaller. So it makes it really hard to use the restroom. I don't know if I'm fertile still. Memory fog, brain fog. Obviously, it's probably due to all the hormones I've taken. Obviously, my chest is completely numb. So if someone were to stab me in the chest, I probably wouldn't feel it.
Most of the effects from the testosterone for me have faded, thankfully, but there are some lingering ones, such as my voice will never be the same again. I experienced symptoms of liver and gallbladder damage. I experienced heart palpitations, which were also related to the binding that I've been doing on and off for 15 years. I also experienced incontinence, which I didn't even know was from the testosterone until I talked to other detransition women and they said they had the same thing, which was pretty shocking to me because almost none of this was brought up as potential side effects. Taking high amounts of cross-sex hormones is a lot riskier for your health than just any other psychiatric medication. It's like a completely different animal.
They grafted my nipples and there's been like some pretty serious complications arising from that. So I started taking a class on psychology and child development. And I had a lesson about maternal bonding. And that was the first time that I really thought about being a parent and what that might look like for me. And there was kind of a big emphasis on breastfeeding, not only as the means of feeding your child, but it's also one of the ways that mothers bond with their children. And after finding this out, I felt like a monster. I felt like I took something away from my future children and that I knew I would never be able to get that back, and it shook me.
The default proposition for surgeries is to have them be on people who are 18 years and older, and it's all about consent and thinking about what the implications are and things along those lines. That said, there are two exceptions, I guess I would say. Exception one is specifically for transgender boys, so female to male, where chest masculinization surgeries might occur younger. It's a long time to wait, and the harm is more addressable, I'll say. I obviously don't want anyone to ever take the wrong pill, let alone have the wrong surgery. And by wrong, I mean something where they have a different opinion later in life. But the consequence is still something that is something that we can address. Could you actually do another plastic surgery later in the very unlikely event that this person is not correct in their thinking about what they are really going to want in the future? You can. And so we're a little more comfortable. Still, maybe 16 is a typical line, even for that. But that's a place where, for a well-established or for a child with a well-established gender identity, everybody's in agreement. The parents are on board. We're 99% sure, because nothing is ever 100%, that we might feel safe. Certainly, we do that with other kids who have chest surgeries of various sorts. We have cisgender, so not transgender girls, will have breast reduction surgeries. We have cisgender boys who have some breast tissue that develops in puberty, and we will get rid of that. The parents sign off. So we feel safe in that space, I guess is all I'm saying. We do have here too very well-established transgender girls, male to female, who might be a little bit advanced in their life relative to their age, so heading off to college with a birthday in the fall, where we would do the exact same surgery we were going to do anyway after their 18th birthday, but we do it a little earlier so that the parents could be the caretakers instead of like having them in a dorm room or some other less secure spot, and that's all. So you'll see some places that will bend the rule just the tiniest little bit in that space.
So it's a case-by-case basis.
And that's all of them are a case-by-case basis.
Major outrage in Texas today after the state attorney general, Ken Paxton, likened kids getting gender-affirming medical care to child abuse.
Lawmakers are planning to introduce new legislation banning child transgender procedures and protocols.
The news comes after scrutiny over practices at Vanderbilt University Medical Center.
Why is it so important that you would perform something that is so potentially detrimental, irreversible, mutilation potentially to a child's body before they reach the age of 18?
This is an absolute fact that Vanderbilt, they perform double mastectomies on minor girls, on children. They chemically castrate children, and they give them irreversible hormone drugs that change their bodies permanently. They're doing all of that to kids.
I'm not really sure what to do because I've reached out to my surgeon. I've tried to get help from him, but he was just really dismissive of me. He gave me advice that actually made my complications worse. So that was one of many experiences actually after detransitioning. One of my many experiences with like a doctor or a therapist that's kind of made me lose all my trust in my healthcare provider.
So I had scheduled top surgery with a surgeon. I was about 1 to 2 months out from getting it done, but I'm so grateful actually now that it was the voice change that prompted me to just pause everything and just be like, okay, making this one irreversible change didn't work out that well for me, so I'm just gonna hold off on any other types of medical interventions.
After I realized that I made a mistake within 3 months later, the following month I went back to my first therapist and I told her, hey, I think I made a mistake. I feel regret of transitioning. Is there a way I can reverse everything, detransition? And she said, it's not because I made a mistake, it's actually childhood traumas resurfacing, plus the fact that I just had surgery is the reason why I'm having these regretful feelings.
I've lost all faith in doctors. Even our fertility doctor, I have ethical questions.
I mean, one of the first people I reached out to was actually my endocrinologist. And I remember I told her specifically, like, I no longer identify as a boy, and I'm a girl, and I wanna be healthy and just get back on track. And I requested some blood work, and I remember specifically asking for the female guidelines for hormone levels, and I was actually given back the guidelines for the average hormone levels for a teenage boy.
Guys, medical organizations say the anti-transgender rhetoric has crossed the line, leading to threats of violence. Experts say it's putting doctors and people in the trans community in danger.
Well, now we turn to an NBC News exclusive. A growing number of doctors say they are under threat from far-right activists because they care for transgender patients.
Those of us who go into medical care do so to help people, and that's a passion. I was an educator for some period of time, and and the educator in a medical system often gets the area that doesn't have other expertise, and so wearing that hat, I ended up seeing the transgender patients. What I learned was that we're not doing enough to take care of these patients. We're not thinking about it in a conventional medical way enough. Back then we weren't. We were thinking more in a mental health, through more of a mental health lens, and also conventional medicine wasn't yet applying conventional medical approaches. And I thought we ought to be doing that, one. And then two, as I've become more involved, it's an area where there aren't enough of us, and it's an area where I felt like I could have more good impact than some other areas of endocrine in the moment. And of course, if the whole reason you're in a business is for purposes of helping people, then the place where there's the greatest need might be where you go, and that's what happened to me.
We've heard the term from Dr. I believe it's Linda Lippman, this rapid onset gender dysphoria conversation. Can you describe how the medical community approaches that topic when it comes to minors, and how you differentiate between gender dysphoria?
So let me can I ask you to turn this off for just a second? Because
is this off too? No. That's off. Turn this off.
Her name is Dr. Lisa Littman. And if her name sounds familiar, it's because she has played a big role in one of the most intense national debates the country has seen. Well, her research found that children might be determining, I should say, that they are transgender on the basis of peer or cultural influence.
In 2018, WPATH issued a statement that they didn't believe that rapid onset gender dysphoria existed. And when Lisa Littman presented the information and generated the concept, which was just in keeping with what all of us were seeing in our work, they accused her of sort of bad science, and her university got pressure to force her to re-examine her study. So when the pro-advocates talk about Dr. Littman's study, they say, oh, it's bad research and it's been cast aside. But the truth is, when she reanalyzed the data showed exactly the same thing.
The particular investigator surveyed people on a website, I think, or from some websites, where parents who did not want to believe that their children were legitimately transgender were communicating with each other. And those parents, kind of selected in that circumstance, expressed anxiety that maybe their kids weren't really transgender, or that there was some element of social contagion, is what they called it, that they were influenced by their peers. And that's the whole paper. And there is no, whether this is true or not was never not demonstrated, and we in the conventional medical world, who actually take care of transgender people, have not observed this entity.
Well, the vast majority of patients presenting with gender dysphoria today have a history of pubertal onset. Their parents say that they had no clue that there was any cross-gender behavior or cross-gender interest. And rapid onset gender dysphoria is now seen in males, biologic males and biologic females. But as you probably know, there's been a vast sort of tsunami of teenage girls wanting to be defining themselves first usually as bisexual or then lesbian, then they have an eating disorder or they get depressed, and then they get cured they cure themselves with the help of the internet, and they're told that they're transgender, and then they're sure they're transgender and they're passionate about it.
The fear that people will, that there will be a thought that people who are that people will think they're transgender when they're not because of some other mental health morbidity, mostly is not a thing, just to be clear. But that said, the way to approach it conservatively is with expert medical people providing the care.
In the work that I do, I would say 70%, maybe 80% clearly are autogynephilia clients. And it's amazing. So autogynephilia, a guy puts on a dress, puts on makeup, and looks in the mirror. And what he sees in the mirror becomes the object of his sexual affection and sexual arousal. Then you have the transvestic fetish disorder. And the transvestic fetish person, he gets aroused by women's clothing. And so this is just maybe one or two pieces of clothing. So it's a sexual arousal disorder. It's not transgenderism. People try to put this in a category of transgenderism. It's a sexual arousal disorder. If they used real therapy to work with people like I do, I work with therapists to do this. I refer them, but I've learned enough to know what to look for. And the fact of the matter is, if we begin to dig down and find out, like in my own life, sexual abuse, what is that? That's called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And if you look at those issues, whether it's, body dysmorphia, whether it's bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, there are so many different disorders that are in this adverse childhood experience box that needs to be unpacked. If we do that and give them good sound therapy, they will not want to, quote, transition. Because you know what? This issue has never, ever, listen to what I'm going to say because it's going to shock you. It's never been about gender. Being sexually abused is not a gender issue. Being physically abused is not a gender issue. Being put in a dress is not a gender issue. It's an identity issue. It's a broken identity.
The advocates say transgender identity is a thing unto itself, is biologically caused, it'll never change, and the way to treat it is this: transition, hormones, etc.
The desist concept comes from the idea that there are kids who will say they're transgender and they're not, or they will be, they will suffer from gender dysphoria and now they don't, and things like that. And that whole framing to me doesn't make sense, because if what we're really talking about when we say you're transgender or on the spectrum of being gender diverse is that your brain sex, your gender identity, what sex you know yourself to be is not aligned with some of your other biology, then that you're probably born with all that biology. And therefore, it's how you understand it over time and what you want to do about it over time may change, but it's not like you were transgender and now you're not.
We know for a fact, because I have the document from Superior Court of California, San Mateo. My doctor who did my surgery and Walker who approved me for surgery placed a document in Superior Court. In that document, it states that you can't change anybody's gender with hormones and surgery. That document is in the Superior Court. And it says nobody's gender ever changes. And it does say the only thing that they can accomplish with hormones and surgery is to make the person neuter.
I would have still been a man, even if I had done everything. The best I would have done to be a woman would have been a caricature of what I believed a woman was. Even if the world recognized me as a woman, saw me as a woman, treated me as a woman, I would have never been a woman. I would have just been a man, again, cosplaying as one, doing a caricature of one.
I personally don't think transgender is really a real thing, honestly. At this point, and after knowing all the trans people that I know and listening to all their stories and drawing the parallels, I tend to just think that transition's not right for anyone, because even if someone transitions all the way through with the hormones, the surgeries, I believe that they can be happy, but I also believe they're going to live a shorter life, and that's kind of what you have to reckon with is, are you willing to trade a long life for this?
All we're doing is developing a generation of children who will not be able to produce sperm or deliver babies. This is kind of the next abortion before it happens.
In medicine, we talk about things that are cosmetic versus medically necessary.
Right.
And it's not cosmetic. Cosmetic is you don't like how it turned out and you want to fix it a little bit. That's cosmetic. For a transgender woman who has a very masculine face, that's more what we call in the plastic surgery world a reconstructive surgery. If you're in a terrible accident and you're badly disfigured, then fixing you is considered medically necessary and not cosmetic.
Boys are boys from the beginning. Girls are girls right from the start. Everybody's fancy, everybody's fine, your body's fancy, and so is mine. Because sometimes children think that they might change. They might have to change after a while. And, we laugh about that now.
Something about the human race is changing at a previously unprecedented rate. Broken down over time, the LGBT population of America seems to be roughly doubling every generation.
Something I wish I would have heard and understood more when I was a 13-year-old is that I was perfect how I was, and you can be a woman however you are in the body that you have. There isn't one way you have to be a woman. There isn't one way you have to be to be a man. And I wish that society was more accepting of gender nonconforming people, because I think the fact that I didn't feel supported to cut my hair, dress, or express myself how I wanted made me feel like I had to transition to do those things.
If I were to go back in time to speak to the girl that I was, I would say, just wait. I know it sucks, but it only gets better from here. This distress is not forever.
What would you do if your child went through this?
Get them a non-gender therapist. We plan on homeschooling.
Yeah, it's a little scary, like the things that your kids can pick up from school these days. Even at 22, I don't think you should have been able to make that decision like you were.
I shouldn't have been allowed to wander the earth.
You know,
that was a mess.
You're still a kid. Like you didn't know what this was going to do, and we still don't know what all of this is going to do to people. Like, have we really had like a whole generation of people that have gone through this like we are now? I mean, it's scary.
One lady I recently asked, I was like, name one notable trans person who has died of old age or natural causes. I bet you can't name one. This is going to be a hard life for anyone who goes down this path.
Let's say 15-year-old young Abel is in front of me. I'd say, like, I know you're still debating whether you want to do this. Trust me, it's not all rainbows and sunshines as they are telling you, or they will tell you. I know you're gonna get love bombed. You're gonna get these glitter families, and everyone's gonna say they love you, and your family's are the hateful ones. But your parents know more than these people. Your parents actually care about you because they are your parents. Overall, these drugs, these surgeries aren't gonna help you. You're gonna become a lifetime patient to these drug companies.
I've actually teamed up with other detransitioners to create a group called Detrans United. There's not really a lot of groups that are focused on the activism side of things or the legal side of things, and that's what I want to focus on with Detrans United.
A lot of my activism is protecting young people from going through this, because minors cannot consent to irreversible changes. For one thing, there's a reason we have an age of consent for sex, for getting tattoos, for drinking alcohol, and yet in some states we're allowing children to make irreversible changes to their bodies, changes that will result in severe medical side effects, sometimes for the rest of their lives.
I noticed your cross the second we met. How has faith played a role, if at all, in your relationship and coming to this hopeful, happy spot that you're in now?
It's been huge. As a shared thing together, like our relationship, we feel like it's defined on more than just like physical and emotional. We feel like we've got a spiritual connection as well, because we do pray about a lot of things. We do, like, you have to have a higher power. Having that faith has been what's really kind of driven us to where we are today.
You know, I pushed everyone in my life away. I was very lonely, and I just really didn't have anyone at all. So God was the only thing I had to turn to. So it made a huge difference in getting me through my detransition too.
We have to find a way to protect the children from what the predators are doing to our children today, because it's horrifying. And when you think about the damage and the long-term destruction that's going to come with the future detransitioners whose lives are being destroyed, who cannot bear children, many of them, boys that won't be able to produce sperm, they can never be a dad, many of the girls will never be a mom. This is tragic. This is like Frankenstein stuff. It's so appalling to me that we allow this to go on. And in my world, the way that I look at it, you know, they want to arrest people for things, and you see them grabbing people off of the street, the FBI. I'd close down every stinking gender clinic there is.
I mean, human beings have all sorts of interesting idiosyncratic differences. It's what keeps psychiatrists, I think, who do therapy with people interested, because the diagnoses that people come in and get, the complaints that they have and the diagnoses that they get, like depression or anxiety disorder or substance abuse, these meet criteria, defined criteria, hopefully. However, if I see 10 people with the same diagnosis, I see 10 very different people in very different circumstances that generated meeting the criteria for the diagnosis. And that is true for gender dysphoria.
If you have somebody who genuinely does have some other mental health concern and needs some other support, you don't want to say, oh, maybe it's quote unquote gender dysphoria, and we'll make you feel better by treating you with a gender affirming process.
Unfortunately, most doctors think the first treatment ought to be social transition with or without hormones. Depending on the age, it would be puberty blockers hormones and cross-sex hormones. But there are other alternatives, and I think doctors need to be responsible for thinking about the other alternatives.
It is medical malpractice. And not only that, it's child abuse. It's extended medical child abuse.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely mutilated. Obviously, my chest is completely scarred up. I have at least 4, if not more, scars. Obviously, 2 from the implants being inserted, 2 from the implants being removed, 2 from the chest being reconstructed.
I do consider it mutilation. Part of the definition of mutilation is destroying the function of a body part. I believe it's removing or destroying the function of a body part, and that's exactly what we're doing with these surgeries. We're removing healthy body parts and we're destroying the functions.
But were you mutilated?
Yes, I absolutely was. I don't know if I'll be able to conceive children, and I certainly won't be able to breastfeed them or possibly even bond with them in that way, but they removed parts of my body. They removed my organs. Perfectly healthy, functioning organs. And that is mutilation. That is absolutely mutilation.